Welcome back to the Highlight Your Healing podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Roan. Today's conversation is a deep and honest one. We're talking about what happens when faith and grief collide, when loss doesn't just come once, but over and over again, and how to stay anchored in your faith when it feels like one storm after another. Today, I'm joined by someone who knows that experience in a very real and personal way. Sheila is the voice behind the Quiet Cry Project, and she's going to walk us through her journey of layered and compounded grief. Her story speaks to staying anchored in faith, even when it's hard. So Sheila, I'm so honored to have you here, and welcome to Highlight Your Healing.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Sheila, before we go any further, can you just tell us who you are and what the Quiet Cry Project is all about?
Yes. So as you said, my name is Sheila Wilson. I do want to mention that my maiden name is somewhere still along in there in the future, Sheila Johnson Wilson, for other music projects that'll be connected to the Quiet Cry Project. But yes, I'm the founder of the Quiet Cry Project. And I would like to say that over a 5-year span, I experienced 17 losses. And up to date now, it's been 28 losses with one of my sisters passing away a few months ago. But during the 5-year span, I found myself in a place where I loved God, but I also was hurting deeply. And I didn't always know how to hold both of those at the same time. And what I mean by that is where loss was not new to me, because when I was younger, like in 4th grade, my grandfather passed away. And I was really sad. But the 5-year span started with my dad, who was one of my closest, best cheerleaders of my life. And when I realized that a lot of people were in this same space, what I didn't realize was that it didn't matter. We were all going to still grieve differently. And so I didn't always feel safe to express it. And so over the time of me just staying prayerful and then going through all the series of emotions you can imagine, there was a business coach that I had in 2020. And after sharing my story with her, she's like, girl, you need to give your story a voice. And so I started writing with that in mind, but I couldn't stop crying. And I needed to just get grief therapy again. But I didn't know I had to ask for a grief therapist. I knew there were therapists who were listing what their credentials were, but I needed to make sure it said grief therapy in their list of expertise. And so that helped. And fast forward to September of 2025, I went ahead and created the Quiet Cry Project to give people a place to process grief while still holding on to their faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And first, I'm so sorry for your losses and the recent loss of your sister. So you talk about the Quiet Cry Project. Who or what is the heart behind it, and who is it for? Is it only for women? Is it for just all people who are going through loss? Can you talk a little bit more about your Quiet Cry Project?
Sure. So the Quiet Cry Project is made for both genders. It's made for specifically people who believe the Creator exists. They believe God exists, but they are not as strong as they want to be in their faith because of grief. And this grief is covering all aspects of losses, because even though I did lose 17 people, human beings, back to back in a 5-year span, I then also lost the house I grew up in. I was living there at the time. I had 2 weeks notice to move out. I lost a job back then. I was let go unexpectedly. Even though I had a severance package, I lost a job. I lost friends, and I don't know still to this day why at least 3 friends are not around. Like, they didn't die, but it felt like they died. So the losses are spanning every type of loss that causes us a sense of trauma, a sense of sorrow that goes so deep that it just bounces around in places and spaces that we don't expect it. So I will say it's for believers who are hurting silently, thinking their grief means their faith is weak, and that's just not true.
I'm so glad that you touched on that, because people grieve more than just the loss of a loved one. You
Mhm.
can grieve the loss of a job or even your childhood home. For someone who's listening, who's in the middle of that collision of grief, the back to back grief, the different types of grief, and they're angry at God, questioning everything, what do you want them to know?
I want them to know that I either trust God or I either admit I'm hurting. And there was a time where I wanted to be right with God always, right? I wanted to have a true relationship with God. And I just realized I'm having a difficult time trusting when it comes down to what trust really means. So there's several books that I had to read that were biblically based. And one of them was help me understand what trust in God meant when I'm hurting, right? And I needed to feel free, give myself permission to say what I really felt. I'm hurting this way, that way. And that gave me the freedom up to this day to talk to God in prayer about how I really feel. So in reality, both can exist at the same time. I can trust God. I still can have questions. I can believe. I still can feel broken. It's just that when I feel broken, I need to stay in a space where I want hope. And I know that hope is going to come from my relationship with God. And I think when people understand that, it frees them from that silent pressure, if that makes sense.
Right. It absolutely does. You gave yourself permission to grieve,
Mhm.
permission to heal. What are some things that may have helped you emotionally that maybe people don't talk about enough? Are there any other things you mentioned grief counseling? Are there any other things that help you emotionally during this very, very tough time of the compounded grief?
Yes, definitely. So I love to travel. And at the time that my dad passed away, I was working in the finance industry. So that gave me the ability to have the funds to just go to a tropical place where I love to be. And I didn't know until the compounded grief where my dad passed away, I went away. Then my grandfather passed away, I went away again. Then my godfather passed away, I went away again. And then by the fifth loss of those 17, I couldn't continue to travel because they didn't fall in the category that a corporation would give me permission to take grieving days off. And so that's where I want to say, because I was working a 9 to 5 job, I was given bereavement days, right? That helped me
Right.
realize, oh, I need to acknowledge I need to grieve or I need to be in bereavement. But then when I couldn't take off bereavement days, I was like, okay, I need something more. So going to a tropical place to spend time by the ocean was soothing for my spirit. Getting in the ocean, not too far in the ocean, so I wouldn't drown. I felt healing. Okay, it was healing. But then when I couldn't go away, I had to not only pray more and ask God, what is it that's going to help me? I had to listen because there were people who wanted to comfort me, right? So there were suggestions. Oh, you should light a candle and talk to your loved one. For me personally, I could not because of my relationship with God and me studying the Bible the way that I did to get to that point, I was like, okay, but God, you say this about who I talk to. So I needed to be clear. I'm going to continue to pray to God. I am going to, however, write. So I did write in my journal. I did write letters to those who passed away, not expecting to send it to them, knowing that they wouldn't read the letter, but it helped me release whatever the words were that came to me to express what I wanted to say. But in addition to that, I learned from a couple of other grief therapists what's called tapping, a tapping exercise. And we touch on different points that connect to points that are used for acupuncture, points that are used for when you're exposed to chakra points of your nervous system and that healing aspect. So tapping exercises as well as writing music. I express myself through music. I compose music on piano. I play flute and piano fluently, but I compose music. So as a result of that, I created about 5 songs in tribute to my dad when he passed away. I performed
Mhm.
one of them at his funeral, and I had composed music for an aunt. I had composed more music for a great aunt. And so that helped when it comes to releasing. But in addition to that, there was just movement my body needed. I did not know that you may know, right, Shannon, that trauma can get stuck in our body. And losing a loved one is not as simple just saying, oh, that person died. No, there's something more that tends to be trauma, and how it happened. And so when I learned a few exercises from a grief therapist, then I started to do that type of movement too. So there were guided meditations I was given from a grief therapist, where I just laid down and listened, or I said out loud what I was guided to say. But those are the things, a plate full of things that have helped me go through this grieving process.
I love that you shared all of those. Definitely the writing of the letter is one of the things that I love to guide my clients, or
Mhm.
journaling and the movement. Grief truly does live in the body. I love that you shared how that helped you get through those very tough times. And the composing of music. Music is so relaxing. We know grief doesn't just stop. It doesn't have a timeline.
Mhm.
And when it resurfaces, even now, how do you care for yourself? Do you go back to any of those things that you used to do during those losses years ago?
Yes, that's a great question. So I do something a little different now, and that is allowing myself to feel even more, even deeper, because my dad passed away many years ago. And what I experience is coming up to the anniversary date of his death, which happens to be coming up April 4th, my body
Mm,
tends to remember and revisit the sadness to a degree as if it's about to happen again in 2 weeks. And so I've learned as I was writing through the Quiet Cry project that I need to allow myself to feel now. And it may be that I felt before, right? But I've realized that in some cases I didn't feel 100% back then because of how compounded it was. It was like one after the other, 17 in 5 years, if you can imagine. So now that there's some space, yeah, I'm allowing myself to feel deeper. And what that means is if I'm crying without expecting to be crying, driving behind the wheel, I'm going to let myself cry. The other thing is, I
mhm,
think you may know that when we let tears fall all the way down our face, there's a scientific healing fact of that. When we let the tears fall, and of course, leave the scientific definition and description to where we can write it somewhere, right? But when I allow the tears to fall down my face and I smell, or I do get a woof of the smell of the tears, which is kind of magical, it does add to my healing journey now more than before because I didn't know before. There's times when we're crying, we're trying to wipe away the tears before we let them fall down our face. Now it's I let the tears fall all the way down my face. If I'm on a bus, if I'm in public, now I let it fall. The other thing is it seems to be new, but I'm from New York City. I did not experience this in New York City. Now that I'm in Denver, Colorado, I see bunny rabbits, I see butterflies. And it
mhm.
seems to be at the time where I need that boost the most to feel like a little kid who's so excited to see the best thing ever. I experience that when I see bunny rabbit. I experience that when I see a butterfly. And there is a connection for what I feel in my spirit at that time to some kind of aspect of healing that God is doing with me, remembering whoever's on my mind. The sunset
Right.
and the sunrises as well are what I tend to pay more attention to. And it happens to be a lot of the time I'm viewing the most amazing aspect of nature at a time that someone just passed away or a time where it's their heavenly
Mm,
birthday, so that's a part of what I'm experiencing. And I never stopped writing in my journal, never stopped praying. What I will say has been a little bit deeper now that I've been writing for the Quiet Cry Project. I'm digging more into scriptures that friends have shared with me that help them when their parents pass away, for example. So I'm having more conversations and I'm getting more tools, if that makes sense, that other people have
mhm.
used I didn't know for myself. So that's a long answer, but that's the best I could say.
I love that. And, that you're seeing the things that remind you, right? The bunny rabbits or the sunsets. For me, seem to always find a rainbow, even if it's just like a very,
Mhm.
very small glimmer of one.
Yes,
It would always stand out to me. So I love that you mentioned those things.
yes, me too.
Why is it important for you to share your voice and your story to help others?
It's important because when the business coach I'm mentioning, and I'm so grateful for her for saying this to me, when she said to me I needed to give my story a voice, it was so that it wouldn't be stuck in my body, one. Two, at the time that she talked to me about it, one of my uncles had committed suicide, which was not expected. It was one of the close brothers to my mom, and I felt it. And out of the shock and out of the little amount of communication throughout the family, I was like, well, I need to do something for me. And so it may help them in the near future. But I noticed that when I lost my baby, for example, and out of curiosity, before posting on Instagram, I was like, let me just see if there are hashtags for this. I was blown away at how many millions of women around the world were hurting from miscarriages. Not the basic, way that people throw it around in our society. Oh, you had a miscarriage? Oh, no, 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 no. I gave birth to a baby who was stillborn. So, like other women, I have experienced that. So, when I realized how many people were hurting, how many people were not talking about these different type of losses to the degree that we need them, and then also realizing that I was connecting more with a stranger on TV than the people that I personally know, I was like, no, this has got to be, there's got to be something better. And so praying through it, then I made it. God made it clear to me. I am meant to share. I am meant to help heal myself more and give other people permission to heal more. And when
Right.
I say heal, I don't mean heal like, oh, it's done, we're healed. I don't think that's gonna be the case. Even though some people may feel like that is the case when they're coming from a space where they're at in their Bible study,
Hmm.
I understand this is where there's a scripture I should have it on me, but I don't have it on me right now, where in the scriptures talks about how we might be going through sufferings, but we can comfort others when they're going through their sufferings. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned healing. We're never healed.
Right.
I like to, say rediscovering joy after
Yeah.
loss. What does that look like on the other side of loss? And I think you described that so well as, the things that you've done. Telling your story, that is also a part of healing. For
Hmm.
me, telling my story was a part of my own journey, is being able to help someone else.
Hmm.
Back then during my losses, I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to or that most people were talking about
Right.
pregnancy loss. That was just something that you would go through and people would move on. So
Right.
I felt like I had to do the same and suffer in silence. So I'm glad that you're telling your story, that you're sharing your voice, because it is making an impact and helping someone else who's also going through their own grief journey. Can you just take me back just throughout your losses? Did you feel like you had a supportive community? And that could be your church family, your family, friends. Did you have that? And if so, did you find it helpful?
I thought I did. And there's a lot that I experienced. And I will tell you before I forget, the verse that I was referring to is 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4. So 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 4, about how we can comfort each other in all our troubles.
Hmm.
But in reference to community, yes, I did. And I think what I experienced is kind of complex. So when my dad passed away, I was in the Church of Christ in New York City, International Church of Christ. And I did have a circle of friends, and then I had the community when it comes to like the whole church community, as far as the location that I was going to. There was some support, but because shortly after my dad passed away, losing my grandfather, then my godfather, and then my uncle, and then da 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 da, for that first set of 8, 9 months, I started to forget stuff. So
Mm.
apparently, fast forward, even though I had the community, what I started to experience was friends who were my close friends did not call me. Of course, they called me immediately. My dad passed away, but once the fourth or fifth person had passed away, it was different. And I had spoken to each of them to ask, well, how come you didn't call me? At the time I was hurting, right? So however it came out, it may not have been the best, because I remember one of the conversations, I was almost so emotional, shouting out loud at the top of my lungs outside on the street, because it didn't feel fair. it's not what I thought I'd get. It hurt. So I went through a series of that type of disappointment. Um, but I had to release that, obviously. And then be, because of the changes the church ministry went through, I started to take a step back, because I prayed. I was like, God, if you have something better for me, if something's not right here, make it clear, right? So I continued to join a different ministry that was based out of Atlanta, but planted a ministry in New York City. So then there was a distance, because I wasn't close to a lot of people at this new church, right? And I started to just try to make friends. And even though I did make friends, it was different. They were not my best friends. So telling my story over again from scratch is what I had to do for therapists. But to do that with making new friends, I was starting to get a little tired, for lack of a better way of
Mm-hmm.
saying it. Um, and I did have at least 3 friends from the church who are still my friends to this day, who have been with me as a friend through all those losses. But I will say this: even though I had those friends, I still felt alone. Even though I had the therapist, I still felt alone. And the one thing that God had taught me from the very beginning, all through it, was remember Jesus and his experience going to the cross, and how Jesus asked his disciples in, was it Matthew chapter 26, somewhere there, to sit back and pray for him and watch his back, basically. And they didn't. They couldn't, because they were tired. They fell asleep. And that journey on his way to the cross was for me to remember that even Jesus's closest friends weren't there for him 100%, but God was. And that's the thing that I, to this day, have to keep going to help me not be too thrown off or too disappointed when the friends cannot come through. God will always come through. But I will say this: I was
Right.
single. I was single at the time. I was like, God, I need someone to hug me. I want someone to hug me. It was difficult, because most of the other people older than me were in a relationship. They had someone to go home to. They had someone to hug them. They had someone to lay next to them. I gratefully got married before my mom passed away, before I had, lost my baby, before the few other losses that have come up to now. My husband understands loss, because he lost his parents before we met. So God put me with someone who was compassionate and understood deeper than most of the other people I was close to before I married him. So I have to mention that as well. My journey is complex,
Right.
but yeah, that's the gist of it.
Thank you for sharing. You mentioned the loss of friends. That's another thing that we can grieve. We can grieve the loss of a friendship.
Yeah.
All right. These are people that have been there probably most of your lives, that you've shared, many things with, and now that person is gone.
Yes.
Right. We can grieve the loss of a friendship. So I just really quick was able to pull up the scripture. I believe he said 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4.
Yes.
uh, who comforts us in all of our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. And that's
Yes.
2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes. You're welcome.
What advice would you give someone who is navigating something similar? Is there any advice that you would leave to the listeners today?
Yes. I will say, allow yourself to be honest with what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And if you don't know exactly how to express what you're feeling or thinking, then consider to pray. And if you're not comfortable with praying, consider to write. I, Writing for me tends to become a prayer to God now anyway. I write in my journal, it's a prayer to God. I don't like talking to myself. Um, I don't want anyone to feel crazy talking to themselves. That's why I suggest praying. But create a space for both faith and honesty. Create a space where you feel safe being honest. And if that means you have to just write and keep it to yourself, that's your way to be honest. But for both faith and honesty to coexist is my deepest advice. And you don't have to pretend to be okay to be close to God. If you're grieving, it doesn't mean your faith is weak. You don't have to hide your pain to have faith. It means something mattered, and you're still allowed to feel better. One of my doctors who helped me the most, he didn't use the word heal. He said, aim to feel a little bit better every day. And then trust God at the same time. And of course, that's different for everyone what that will look like. But at least don't give up. Do not give up in this journey that you're going to go through or you are going through.
I love that. Do not give up.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, thank you so much for trusting this space with something so sacred and so personal. 17 losses in 5 years and still standing, still believing. That is not a small thing. That is truly a testimony. I know there's someone listening today that has been in a storm and couldn't find the words for what they were feeling. So I hope today gave you those words and reminded you that you are allowed to grieve and still don't hold on to faith at the same time. So Sheila, before we close, can you share with our listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about the Quiet Cry Project?
Yes, thank you for asking. So I do have my website, which is my author website, and where all the different social media handles are. So the site is thequietcryproject.com. thequietcryproject.com. And most of the handles, or I should say all of the handles when it comes to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, it's The Quiet Cry Project. The Quiet Cry Project.
Awesome. Thank you. And if you want to connect with Sheila and learn more about the Quiet Cry Project, all of her information will be in the show notes. So please go show her some love and support the great work that she's doing. I really hope today's conversation encouraged you. Now I need a favor from you. If you have not already, please subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. Because trust me, we have more incredible guests and conversations coming your way. And if this episode blessed you, I would love it if you just take a moment to leave a review and a rating. It helps more women find this show and join this community, and that means everything to me. And until next time, keep highlighting your healing.